We're shocking the world today.
Yeah, they're like, wait, they're live at 10?
Yeah, it might be a little slow. People jumping on today.
Mm-hmm.
It just
There've
might be a
been
little.
some there've been some 10:30s. There have been some 10:30 start times.
Yeah. Well, listen. You can't put on a podcast like this without some.
Yeah,
Sometimes you just got to have some deep travail and preparation and all the
true.
things.
True. Not to
So,
mention not to mention the periodic tech issues.
periodic might be generous.
My word. I don't know. It's the weirdest, craziest thing. I had issues when my Scarlet, when that day I picked it up, and I'm like, what is going on? I picked it up and there was like
Right.
brown stuff underneath, and I don't
Right.
know. I doubt. I mean, it certainly isn't from that, but I'm just wondering if somebody
Mm.
accidentally spilled something.
Uh-oh.
You know what I'm saying?
Uh-oh.
I don't know.
Yeah, that can happen, man.
And it was
That can
cleaned
happen.
up. It was cleaned up, but then the Focusrite that maybe doesn't get picked up, and then.
Yeah, I feel that. I think that's definitely a possibility.
We
It was
we
definitely
have.
having some stuff, wasn't it?
I know. I know it. Um, the one thing that I like about our episode today
Yeah.
is this idea that says, it's like it's it's like anything. Once you get one thing fixed,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me, the effort and the attention. And I was thinking about how in our early state, I pulled up that RSS feed. So for everybody that's jumping on, I don't know. I think did. I sent that to you in here. Let me copy it and put it in the chat. And this RSS feed
Okay.
is that will give you that right there will give you what? It's trying to make me log in.
To what?
Why is that? I'm trying to put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you see it in the chat?
I do not see it in the chat.
It's trying to make
But
me log into. Whoa, wait. No. I don't want to do that. That's trying to make me log into Restream. What? That is so
okay.
weird.
I just put it on there.
Oh, wait a minute. It's trying to make me log into Restream. Okay, here we go again.
What?
Here we go again. I am
What?
trying. Chris,
You can't see chat?
no, it's making me log into Restream. Now I'm going to be a guest. No? Huh. That's so weird. It was making me log into Restream. Like last week, remember I couldn't see the chat?
Yeah.
So when I went to put that RSS feed in,
Yeah.
it was saying log into Restream. And I'm like, why does
So,
it make me log into Restream to put a Buzzsprout
you know what I think
link?
happens?
What?
I think maybe you and I are using the same login, but you still should be able to see the
Oh.
chat. You still should be able to see the chat. Maybe
It
we need to
says
figure out how to log in.
it seems your account was changed. Some things may not work well. Refreshing. No. Refreshing.
Oh, that was amazing. I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that happened, right now, and he's gone again. Nope, he's not there. He is not there. Alright, well, we will continue to work. Hello, you're not wrong, Angie. You're not wrong, boomers. Listen, alls I gotta say, I'm not gonna throw my brother under the bus, and he'll never see this part, but here's the deal. Mine seems to be working perfectly fine. I'm just saying, like, mine's working perfectly good. So we know who the boomer is. Just saying. So I do have a couple of things here while we're waiting for him to figure out what he's got going on tech wise, and I'm sure he'll be on in just a second. See, this is what happens. We show up at 10 o'clock, and and we end up dealing with this stuff. So I do have a couple of things here real quick to finish up. Yes, I am a pastor. All right, hold on just a second here. He is texting me. Okay, here he comes. Come on, there he goes. You there?
Did you see that? So it said refreshing page,
Yeah.
and then it brought me back in. It says log in as a guest.
Yeah. So can you see the chat now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I think there's something to do with that because it shows. So last week when I commented, it commented as me. This time it showed my comment was from host. So I think maybe whoever logs in first gets the host.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It just tried to log me in as Cree Dillahan. Did you see that in the picture when I sent you?
No. Oh, yeah. So when I try to log on every time, it shows me. Oh, there you go. You're host too.
Okay.
It shows me when I try to log on, it's Ken Grissom Dillingham Jr. the third. So I don't know what in the world's going on.
That's awesome.
I don't know what's going on. All right. So yes, we do have a topic to discuss, but depending on the question, certainly can try to answer questions. That's what we do. This is the beginning. For those that are just joining, this is kind of the pre-show, and then we'll do a 3, 2, 1 and start the live recording. But we invite guests to ask questions and whatever. So we'll try to answer them, especially if they're relevant to the topic we're discussing and whatever. But so feel free to pop it in there. If we're able to answer it, we will. Ken, you want to give us a Chief Meteorologist, Ken Bistarkey, weather report on the 8s?
Chief Meteorologist. What was that?
Chief Meteorologist.
That was my AI voice. Chief Meteorologist Ken Bistarkey checking in today. Good morning, he says. Cloudy, 35 degrees, high of 45. Feels like 22 in Northeast Ohio.
There you go. There we go. The weather reports. Yeah, so
well, conservative dinker. Before we go fully online, the question is, why is the U.S. complicit in the Israeli genocide of Palestinians and their stronghold on world governments and their financial systems via usury?
It seems that your opinion has already been established. There's not really a question there. That's more of a statement.
Yes. The question is not a question. The question is not a question. The question is a statement. The second question is not a question. Conservative dinker continues to ask statements.
Absolutely.
Which means
obviously that's
which means the opinion has already been formed, thus a question is unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've already got your answers. I mean, it's certainly that the way the premise of the questions maybe need to be altered a little bit, but the whole topic is a worthy conversation. But
it's a topic of discussion. It's just not phrased as a discussion. So we're going to go 3, 2, 1 and talk about a more relevant and eternally important topic.
Here we go. You ready?
Right, let's go.
Let's do this. No, that's not the point. It's not.
See, conservative dinker is like all people in this genre of thinking. It's it's filled with implicit assumption.
Yeah.
My point is simply the avoidance of the question is the fact that you didn't ask a question. It's the fact that you made a statement. And so we're not here to reply to statements. This is a conversation. You're not having a conversation. You're just simply wanting to make your statement on what you think about the situation. Now, if you had a question and you wanted to have true dialogue, then what you do is you ask an actual question and you say, what do you think about this? I've been looking at this, I've been thinking, but you state it in a way in which you have arrived at a conclusion. Therefore, there's no reason to have a discussion. And then you arrived at a conclusion about us without a discussion, which proves you're not worthy of having a discussion with.
Mic drop. And there you go. And that's
Yes.
not, I mean, that's just what you just said. There's a statement of facts. I love the way that you said that, what you said there at the end. Like you make an assumption without us even having the conversation. And so that just proves the point. No.
Again,
No.
oh, this is awesome. Conservative Dinker continues to so let's I'll read the chat for
Hold on. Can I just say something? Bro,
Yeah.
that's such garbage.
Yeah.
That is absolutely. You're saying that a statement that says, why is the U.S. complicit in Israeli genocide of Palestinians and their stronghold on world government and their financial systems via usury is not a declarative statement?
Right. That's like saying to somebody, that's like saying to somebody,
come on, bro.
How long have you been gay?
100%. Or when did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah. So what happens is here's why we don't engage with this kind of thing, right? This is why we don't engage in actual dialogue, is because when there is implicit assumption, then what happens is that in the implicit assumption, there is no room for dialogue. And so what happens is that in that context, when you say, well, you're just making these statements to deflect. No, the point is there's nothing to deflect because I haven't made an opinion and you're already assuming to make an opinion. You've arrived at a conclusion. And then you're basing an assumption about the fact that we're not engaging it because we said it's not really actually a question. You're just simply making your statements, which goes back to the point that it proves that you're not willing or desirous to have a conversation with, and you're not worthy of one.
And you're being totally and completely disingenuous.
Right.
And I was willing and we were willing to engage when you said, hey, mind help me with a quick question I'm struggling with. You have your opinions, you have your thoughts on those things, and that's totally fine. You approached it like there was a question, something that you were wanting to kind of wrestle through, and then you made declarative statements about a position that you've clearly already drawn your own conclusions on. So that's totally fine. If that's your
get your own
opinion,
podcast. Go get your own podcast. Go. Yes, maybe you should call the Dan Bongino Show. Exactly. Go ahead and get your own podcast, and then you can go out there and make all kinds of crazy declarative whatever you want to say about whoever and whatever, and all of your secret inside information you've got about Netanyahu and his being a clone and all the amazing stuff that you like to talk about.
Absolutely. And again, the topic is a worthy conversation. We would totally engage a conversation with that. You have an opinion. That's not what we're here to talk about today. And quite frankly, the way that you broached the subject was totally and completely disingenuous.
Right.
And so you're clearly trying to draw us into some sort of debate or conversation, and we're not doing that today. So Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interaction and engagement, and probably took about 8 minutes longer than we should have given it, but here we are. So you ready to go?
Go take a walk, go read your Bible, have some prayer time,
There's your answer. If you're struggling with it, you just answered it.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
Say that again.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that what happens is we have to just sort of take a deep breath, go take a walk, put these things out of your mind, go to Jesus and say, Jesus, does this really matter in your eternal plan? Is it taking up space in my mind and my thinking that doesn't require it? Maybe it might be awesome to go find a place in the Lord where you find the kingdom of God coming alive, and then experience some transformation that helps others experience that the kingdom of God is alive and well.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, let's get to the podcast. Let's
Let's
rock and
go.
roll.
Let's
Here we
go.
go. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham, alongside my big brother Ken Dillingham, Junior the Third, on this brisk January morning, beginning the year, kicking it off strong. We've already had some interesting pre-show dialogue and questions. So, man, I'm ready. I'm ready to dive in today. And hey, listen, even with some tech issues, Ken,
Mm-hmm.
and listen, I hate to call you out. You may not, have seen this or not, but somebody may or may not have called us, and I think it was primarily directed at you as boomers because we had some tech issues. But we were on at 10 today.
Well, it's true. Now, but the boomer, yeah. I mean, the thing about it is when you've done something 100 times, 251 to be exact.
There you
If
go.
you've done something 200 times, and on the 201st time, what you've done the whole time isn't working anymore, it might actually be a systemic glitch and not a boomer glitch.
Ooh, there you go. You're on fire today. The bear has been poked, as Anthony Richards says. So here we go. But no, we're gonna have a great conversation today, and we're part of the new year is we're locked in to getting things kicked off, getting things started at the right times, and so appreciate everybody being on. We do want to hear from you about relevant topics and things that are relevant to what we're going to discuss today, and so you can put those in the chat, and we would be more than happy to have a conversation and address the questions you have as we go through this. So let's go. Here we go. Let's get into it today.
Let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to set it up as we are inclined to do here. Often set you up. That's my role. Point guard, you're shooting guard. So I'll set you up and let you just drain the threes today. So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the idea we often live in the world of either or, right?
Yes.
And so, it's amazing how many unnecessary debates, arguments, whatever crazy positions are really rooted in this. It's either my way or it's the other way, and there's no in between, whatever. One of the things we've really in this journey tried to navigate through is this idea of what you call the healthy missional ecosystem.
Correct.
Which has truthfully been our goal, because one of the things that what we do and the journey that we've been on has been, the premise has been this, that healthy things that are fulfilling their design purpose, we have within us, the potential and the responsibility for multiplication. So the goal has never really been multiplication. The goal has always been, how do we build a healthy culture that naturally grows and produces what it's designed to do? And so the goal has always been healthy. But you particularly have really honed in on this idea of like, okay, let's figure out what does a healthy missional ecosystem look like. So you want to maybe kind of talk about that, set that up, and then today we want to really, maybe just briefly, but we'll really talk about the tensions that come along with this concept of a healthy missional ecosystem.
Yeah. So, I think that as we dive into this topic, it's important maybe to just go back. This morning, we were looking at our a comprehensive list of our prior podcasts, and I was kind of looking at the topics, seeing kind of how the topics have evolved. And what's interesting about that, the early topics, what we really spent a lot of time talking about was sort of a counterbalance. I think this is important. It was kind of a counterbalance to what was a very institution heavy missional operating system. And so we did a lot of talking in the early days about the attractional model church. We spent a lot of time talking about changing the operating system of the church, etc. And a lot of that was moving it toward not something that would be any kind of an anti whatever. Well, it's not like it's not anti-institution, it's not anti-church, it's not organized mission. It's not it's
Yeah.
interesting. I don't know if you noticed yesterday I sent a text into that text group with those you and I and a couple of missiologists. It was a text about another missiologist who basically just torched the home church concept, and the whole idea of the home church. And what's interesting is that he torched it in the sense that the home church is his position, the way he came from, was actually basically that the home church was a unhealthy reflex against something. It wasn't a
Hmm.
recovery of something good. It wasn't so in that sense, what we're saying is that means that it wasn't balanced. It's not healthy. Anything
Yeah.
that's not balanced isn't healthy. And so what we were doing in the early days was not necessarily trying to create some kind of an opposing like we need to stop this and start doing this. What we were doing was saying we need to really take a really hard look at how much personal, organic, individual, missional engagement there is in the church and why. And why so much of the missional efforts revolve around programs and activities and services and things that are done under the steeple. And this was to be done in a counterbalanced kind of way. And I think that today we've arrived at a place where we're saying that we recognize that we need both, but I think that's where you come up with a healthy, balanced missional ecosystem.
Yeah, 100%. And then one of the things that happens with that is um there's always unintended consequences. So like you said, when you take emphasis off of one area and you place it on another area, there are some unintended consequences that happen as a result of that redirected focus to one particular area, whatever. And so this is something I think we've really learned in the journey, trying to navigate this and really figure a lot of this stuff out. So so what we really want to hone in today is, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously there has to be some level of understanding about like what does a healthy missional ecosystem look
Right.
like.
Right.
But what we really want to focus on is the tension
Mm-hmm.
that comes as a result of building the right culture, which at times forces you to maybe place a little extra emphasis on this place because you're strong in one area and weak in another area. And so we
That's
really,
right.
really want to hone in on those tension pieces today.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, where we're settling in is that as we set that up initially in a counterbalance type way, what it's like I was thinking about, this is interesting. I was thinking about how you said early on, a lot of times you would mention, you'd make this statement, you'd say, when dad used to tie somebody's strong arm behind their back so that they would
Yeah.
learn to play with their weak hand. They would
Yeah.
learn to, you
Yeah.
gotta, sometimes even piano teachers make their students take the right hand off the keyboard and play just, with the left hand, play the bass notes and the rhythmic parts and so on and so forth, down in that lower register. And there was a lot of times where we would talk about that. And I think this is interesting because what we're saying is we're simply trying to do this for balance. But what happens is that everything has an opposite and equal reaction. So when we, so what happens is when we overbuild programs, people begin to sort of not take personal responsibility for it. Like if it's one of these deals where it's like, if somebody believes, oh, they're taking care of it, or we got this thing coming up, or this is going to be a big event that we're going to have, or whatever, then people
Yeah.
begin to feel like my job is just to get people to the event. And so, but I think on the flip side of that, so what we're saying is if we build too much institutional, programmatic, whatever, then it deflates. It causes the organic individual activity to sort of retract a little bit.
Sure.
Well, then what happens is then when okay, well, wait a minute, we don't want that to happen. We want people to live on mission. We want people to be out, where they learn and where they live, where they work, where they play, and so on. But so then you start focusing on, okay, look, we're going to scale back on the institutional piece. We're going to scale back on activities. We're going to scale back so people can do all of the organic stuff. And then the next thing you know, you start scaling back on the sort of the corporate side or the organized side. I'm going to say programmatic. I'm just saying on the organized side, and just be like, nope, we're not going to organize it. We're going to just let it go. And what ends up happening is that then the organic feels to be puffed up, but then things get a little wonky and discombobulated, and we don't really know what's going on, and we don't have a good handle on, because everything's being done organic, right? And we don't have a
Yeah.
good handle on, who's discipling who, and who's teaching somebody a Bible study, and what's going on. And so what happens is you feel like there's this tension where when one thing becomes the main thing for too long, the other thing begins to be diminished, and then all of a sudden you swing the pendulum back, and so there's this constant ebb and flow that is really, really tough sometimes to manage.
And I think in the beginning stages, we really underestimated that, right?
Bro, bro.
And
Why? Because we felt like we needed to, because it was so strongly, almost myopically institutional, that we felt
correct.
like, well, let's make it myopically organic.
Right. Right. And right. And I think as purists, when you look at it, the purest form is, I used to make the statement and still do, and I believe this, but our primary calling for every spirit-filled believer is to be a disciple that makes disciples. So the purest form of the mission is when you have transformed people living on mission every single day, look at having spiritual conversations, looking for people that are disciplable and all of those kinds of things. That is the purest form. And I think as purists, there was a piece of us that was like almost to the point, like you said, because there was so much emphasis on the institutional side, and truthfully, like if we're being really honest, truthfully,
Hmm.
there was some, but not nearly enough on that individualistic piece, like the purest form. And so we're like, if we're gonna make this shift, like we've got to radically alter and change this whole dynamic. And so we spend
Right.
so much of our time focusing on how do we get to that purest form, which then we started seeing some of these unintended consequences that started coming to pass.
Hmm.
That then we're like, okay, well, let's alter and adjust. Which you've made a statement, and I don't want to jump ahead too fast because I want to walk through this, but you've made a statement that I think is really, really true. And that is, I think one of the changes for us has been, if we're thinking of, like multiplication or whatever, this is the as an end goal, we're always going to be frustrated.
Hmm.
And that's really not where we're looking towards. It's always this constant balance, finding this constant balance in this.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. Balanced and healthy is are interchangeable terms, because anything that's imbalanced isn't healthy. Like, for example, an imbalanced diet. you know,
Absolutely.
right? If you eat an imbalanced diet, then you're not going to be healthy. In fact, what's funny is that even like with aging, like geriatric medicine.
Hmm.
In geriatric medicine, one of the ways that they test a person's health, their cognitive health, is basically to see where they are with balance. This is really weird. I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail here, but I'm just thinking that balance is so important because it affects systems that we don't really realize. I think this is the reason why I'm going here.
Yeah,
Like in a lot of geriatric medicine or whatever, particularly physical therapy for people that are not necessarily dementia or whatever, but just older people, they actually have a lot of work that they do to help them with their balance.
sure.
And for whatever reason, that triggers something neurologically. Balance has to do with something neurological. And so there are systems that you can't see that are affecting and being affected by a person's balance. And I think the similar type thing, what we're talking about today is that North American churches became so Sunday centric and attractional that it created, and this is the thing that we're realizing, Chris, that we don't really necessarily we don't have the time to talk about why. I think there's a lot of reasons why. I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about revivalist movements and the circuit riding preachers that came, and so the most efficient way to communicate to a community is to gather everybody together and preach and talk about the gospel and try to build a church that way. It is a slow process. Think about the United States of America in those pioneering days. The circuit riders and these missionaries to the United States would go out to these outposts. They'd go to these new communities that are being formed, and they would go and they would find some public building and they would bring this community together and they would preach to them. They preach the gospel. And I think it created a lot of emphasis on the fact of gathering people together, get them to a place so that they can hear the preacher preach about the kingdom, about Jesus. And if they would have gone, here's what's so crazy. If they would have gone to those places and said, we're going to go here, we're going to sit down here, we're going to stay here, and we're going to spend a while, and we're going to really communicate and talk and find disciplable people and whatever. What took them 1 or 2 or 3 weeks in a revival framework might have taken them a year.
Yeah.
And their whole idea was we want to reach as many people as we can reach in the shortest amount of time. And so I think there's a little bit of that, but the point is that so to the point that in the 21st century, the church became such an attractional thing that it tried to build the buildings and the whatever. And so what we're saying is that the efficiency actually killed multiplication and the organic missional discipleship.
100%. So I'm just going to real quick give kind of an overview of kind of the 4 spaces of a healthy missional ecosystem, and then we can, and I think, kind of use that as the launching point to talk about some of the tensions that come along with that, and what happens when one area is overemphasized over another area. And so as I mentioned, the first space is the purest form, and that is individual lives living on mission, living out the transformation, what it means to have the way of Jesus become your way and living it out every single day. And people around you, as Michael Frost, makes the statement, living questionable lives, living in such a way that's so different from everybody else around you that you're having conversations, you're sharing, that the difference is not just because you're some extraordinary person or whatever. It is the work of the Spirit of God. It's the work of His Word. And so then that becomes, us living on mission, looking for people because we want them to experience that. That's the purest way. And as we find those people, what do we do with people around us that are saying, I want to know more about this Jesus way, and I'm willing to lay down my way for His way. We call those people disciplable people. Then we get them into discipleship groups, smaller groups where people have the ability and the place to really dig into to areas of their life, whatever it is, any place that's not like Jesus that needs to be transformed, they sit down, have conversations, and really dig in those places. What are places not like Jesus? What are places that are causing me pain? Places that I'm struggling with or wrestling with that are maybe in contradiction to the Word of God and the Spirit of God. And we work through those, and then talk about, as a part of those groups, talk about living missionally. But what we've also found is that, again, that's the purest form. That's for those people that are right now ready to be discipled. They're ready to go. But there's also a lot of people that we come in contact with that, actually, before I get to that, I'm gonna skip over one spot and go to the fourth area, and which is the corporate gatherings, which, again, we've been abundantly clear over the years. I think when we came out initially, like you said, we were so emphasized on that area that we kind of came out and it sounded like we were against, church services and that kind of stuff, which is not the truth. Right. Amazing things happen when God's people gather together. We totally believe in that. It's 100% necessary. And the reality is, it is a part of the mission. You have people that are going to come, and they're gonna come and experience the power of God. They're coming searching and looking, but we don't always truly know if they're really disciplable.
That's right.
They may just be experiencing pain, or they may just be cultural Christians or whatever. And so they come. Well, what do we do? What do we do with those? Or what do we do with people maybe that are not ready to be fully disciplable, but they're beginning kind of a journey, and we need to discern whether that's the path for them.
Yeah.
So there's this third space, which is kind of maybe like a larger group that is designed for, discerning that. How disciplable are they? How do we help them build relationships and connections so that we can identify their disciplability? So those are kind of the four spaces: the private, personal, missional, discipleship groups, which we call XGroups, that middle space, whether you want to call them life groups, small groups, whatever, and then our corporate gathering space.
Yeah, and I think though it's important to really understand those terms and understand how the interplay of that is necessary to have a healthy and balanced missional ecosystem. Because, as you mentioned, the obviously private missional life, and we're still going to live and die by our premise that the most effective form of mission is when individuals are having conversations in the spaces of life where they live. I mean, we're still gonna live and die on this idea that says that the most effective mission is when you turn every single person into a missionary, and they're working in those spaces where they have friends, where they have relationships, they're connecting with people, and maybe even going into new places, maybe joining a bowling league or a pickleball group or whatever to try to connect with people.
Sure.
But what we've learned is, and I know I'm working in reverse to this, but I'm going the reverse so that we can talk about when the corporate church dominates.
Sure.
And so the reason for that is because you've got the credibility. We've talked about this. I mean, I don't know that we have to go really deeply into why this is, but I mean, you've got the credibility with people. You have the relationships. They see your life. An individual is a less, it's a lower impact area of spiritual exploration. In fact, more and more people are becoming increasingly hesitant, and actually, in a lot of research and studies, are demonstrating that they're becoming almost impossibly hesitant to do the kind of personal spiritual exploration at the corporate church level.
Right.
Because they feel like, well, once I go and once I walk through the door, they're going to turn their systems on me, and they're going to try to turn me into a church member. And I don't want to be a church member at your church. I'm just trying to figure out, is this Jesus thing for me? And that is a growing, that there's a growing element of that. Now, but what's funny is, Chris, is that among young men right now, which is why it's important to be balanced, because there's a growing demographic of young men who are re-engaging for exploration with the church.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's important for us to understand that nothing is static.
Yes.
That humans are dynamic, that culture's dynamic, that situations that happen are dynamic, that sometimes things happen in a way that is a broad scope. Something happens and people go, man, I'm going to church.
See, this has been my deal about all of I'm not against statistical analysis. I'm not against all of that kind of stuff. But my problem with it has been when you make determinations based off of, like these statistical observations,
Right.
oftentimes what happens is you're behind the curve all the time.
Yes.
And the assumption is, well, what we're seeing, okay, so just a few years ago, literally just a few years ago, there were all kinds of statistics saying that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, that they're the unchurched, they're leaving church, they don't want anything to do with religion, they don't want anything to do with Christianity, blah blah blah. And again, whatever the factors are, within just a couple of years, all of a sudden that whole trend has changed.
Right.
Or trends about corporate gatherings and
Right.
like all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
so this is why it's so critically important that we're not trend chasers,
Right.
that we stay true to the principles of the kingdom, which will be, one of the things we say is that you have to be able to contextualize it.
Yes.
In any culture, in any place, if it's not reproducible, then it's not the Jesus way.
Right.
And so whether or not those trends stay true or whatever, it shouldn't alter or change. What I think it means, Ken, as we evaluate these things we're talking about here, what I think it does is it gives us awareness of like what places our responsibility is to steward, what our responsibility is to help. Maybe we need a little extra emphasis on this area or whatever.
In certain seasons. Yeah. And what's interesting as you talk about that is that it is so true what you said. If you're a trend chaser, the reason why that's so dangerous is because if you are a trend chaser, what you're doing is the research is an observation of something that has been.
Correct.
It's very, very rare that research identifies what's coming, because research can only deal with what like particularly research about trends among like church attendance and those kinds of things. I mean, they can only use the data from obviously what has been. Now,
Yeah.
I think there's some real-time stuff where they can talk about in research, they can talk to people about, what are your feelings right now about things and whatever, and try to sort of extrapolate and project and so on. But again, I think that very point proves why it's so important to have a balanced, healthy
Yes.
missional ecosystem.
Yes.
Because if you're chasing the trend, you're either going to be chasing something that you're already behind the curve. You're learning about what the last 3 or 4 or 5 years have shown us. And so the next 3 or 4 or 5 years may or may not continue to reflect that. So you're always chasing something that, I mean, you may get lucky and hit it. You may not. But in a balanced, healthy missional ecosystem, you have all 4 of those places operating so that whatever is happening. So like, for example,
Can I just throw in one thing real quick?
Yeah.
So to that point, just real quick, I literally heard this morning Urban Meyer talking about the NIL and transfer portal.
Yeah.
Okay. So a guy who was as decorated of a college football coach as there is, well respected, whatever. And here was his statement. He said, I totally got what the ramifications of NIL and transfer portal was going to be. I totally got it wrong.
100%.
He said, I thought the rich would get richer, that the bigger schools, the more powerful schools would just dominate because they've got so much. And he said, and actually what's happened, he said, it's produced a greater parity in college football than we've ever seen before. The opportunity for a turnaround, Indiana,
Yep.
And so here's a guy who is
Yeah.
in the weeds of all of it,
Yeah.
trying to
He'd be somebody you'd
prognosticate.
bring in as an expert consultant.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's trying to prognosticate what's happening, what's going to happen as a result of these changes that are happening in college football, and totally and completely got it wrong. And so, to your point, why? Because most of what you're doing is you're evaluating what has been,
Yeah.
and then you're trying to predict what happens in the future. And this is
Yeah.
why we try to stay so locked in on principles and concepts versus trend chasing.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, a 4-star quarterback who didn't get to play at Ohio State or Michigan or Alabama or whatever decides, okay, I've been there. I've been to the big school. I went there. I got a scholarship. Now I want to play, and decides to go to somewhere like a SMU or like a SMU or a South Dakota State or BYU. And the next thing you know, that 4-star actually ends up being better than the 5-star that started in front of them.
Right.
I mean, AKA Joe Burrow.
Or Trinidad Chambliss.
Yeah, exactly.
For Ole Miss.
So the dangers, I think, if the corporate church dominates. So you walk through the 4 groups. So I'll talk about the dangers. If the corporate church dominates, in other words, if it becomes so exclusively corporate level mission, then what happens is the mission gets outsourced from individuals. People eventually become a little bit more passive, a lot more passive. I'm not saying little. They become a lot more passive. And the only way that they are not passive, and what we're talking about now, when we say passive, we're talking about missionally passive. We're not talking about passive about their walk with God. We're not talking about passive about prayer. We're not even talking about passive about church growth. They may be aggressively involved in doing what the corporate church is saying. Hey, this is the next program. This is the next initiative. We're launching this. We want you to get involved. Come on, okay. There's nothing wrong with any of those things, right? But what happens is that their own personal missional, the development of relationships, connecting with people, becoming familiar with what it looks like to identify disciplable people, having good spiritual conversations rather than just simply saying, hey, you ought to come check this out at the church. Whatever goes unused becomes undeveloped. Right. And what's undeveloped becomes basically, stagnant. Sure. And so what happens is people become spectators. Our calendars get overloaded. Okay, life groups. That's that sort of a more personal level. Well, what happens when life groups dominate? Well, then groups over time, at first, if you're going from personal, private discipleship and X groups up to life groups, those life groups are going to be vibrant and they're going to have new people and but over time, what's going to happen? You're going to have less a less of a stream of new people. So then those groups are going to become inward. There's not going to be a lot of new people. There's going to be no spiritual risk. People are just going to get together and talk about things that are basically benign biblical concepts. If X groups dominate, then eventually what happens is people can experience burnout. People could feel like X groups are the new scorecard. If people don't really have their values changed, X groups can become the new attendance number.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And so just like a person feels like that they need to get somebody on. So if the corporate church dominates, okay, let's do it like this. If the corporate church dominates, then a person's going to feel like the pressure is on me to get people to fill seats. The pressure is on me to grow our church attendance. If you reflex too hard the other direction and there's this overemphasis on X groups that's not healthy, then what happens is if they've not really changed their values and their scorecard, X groups now become the new attendance marker. And so now what happens? They get people into X groups that aren't really disciplable. They feel a pressure to, hey, do you got an X group? And so now they fill their X group with people that are just spiritually interested in whatever and not really disciplable. So the wrong type of people get in the group. And then finally, if there's too much of an emphasis of private missional life, then there's no accountability. There's really no discipleship pathway. There's people drift. I would even go so far as to say there's going to be doctrinal drift.
100%.
People are going to be having conversations, and the influence is going to be really one-on-one, and it's going to be organic. And so then those people are going to have conversations and say, they're going to make flat earth disciples, and they're going to make, they're going to make disciples of people of wacky doctrinal things that there's no way to ever know, and things get off. And like, wait, how did we get so off from the center here?
Right.
And so I think this is the idea behind this equal and opposite reaction. If you don't have an ecosystem that's balanced and healthy, each individual piece will have an action that causes an opposite and equal reaction some other area in the ecosystem.
Man, that's so good. That's so good. And this is again why we're hammering so strong about the principle piece and really locking in on that, because what can happen is oftentimes we may not call it like a SWOT analysis, but a lot of times we're making observations about places where we're weak. What are the weaknesses? And so we do one of two things. We either just lean so heavy on the places that we're really, really strong, or we see a place where we're lacking and we're really weak. And so then we try to, again, swing to that way and focus on all that. And I think one of the big things that we're really trying to address here is this idea of, yes, there are going to be moments in the journey where you're probably going to see, maybe development and growth in one area that's happening, faster. It's becoming stronger, whatever, than maybe another area. So our reflex a lot of times is, well, let's put our emphasis on this. And then so you kind of get this constant just up and down and kind of all over the place, where what we're talking about is, how do we live out this balanced view and this balanced approach so we're not chasing that? We're always looking for not just addressing the places of weakness, but really trying to implement the places of balance in all four of these.
That's so good. And I think that, Chris, that really at the end of the day, the hidden issue, the hidden leadership failure is, most churches try to run ecosystems instead of living in them. The leadership issue in this area is there's a lot of pitfall. There's a lot of pressure. You can fall in the ditch on either side. And I think that's the thing that I think the thing about it is that at the end of the day, there are going to be people that are going to show up. I think we've said it like this. Probably the best way to say it is that when God's drawing people and they have no contact with Jesus people, God will draw them to where the Jesus people meet. And most people in the United States know that the Jesus people meet on Sunday or, whatever, predominantly. And so people that God's been talking to them, he's been talking to their heart, he's been talking to their mind, he's been talking to their spirit, whatever. What happens is that they're going to be drawn probably to where the Jesus people meet.
Yeah.
I think the issue becomes, if we don't, as leaders, if we don't have an awareness of the value and the importance of sort of that personal connection, of if we don't have a value that says, look, the deepest kind of transformation happens in a relationship context.
Yeah.
People aren't going to open up their heart. They're not going to share in a big group the real deep thing that they're struggling with, that's caused turmoil in their heart, that's brought them to the Lord for the hope of the gospel. They're not going to share that a lot of times in a big group. They're certainly not going to share it in a mixed male and female group. And so what happens is that there's sometimes, if we're not careful, we'll compartmentalize things. And so I think this is a leadership trap. I think that we'll compartmentalize things and we'll see what's done under the steeple
Yeah.
is the stewardship of the corporate. And what's done outside of the four walls of the church is the
So good.
stewardship of the organic.
Yeah.
And what happens is I think that we miss the fifth space of the mission field, which is the church. Because we say doing the mission where we learn, live, work, and play. But what we're finding is that, but there are also hungry people that are showing up under the steeple.
Absolutely.
And so if we're not careful, we'll fall in the ditch and we'll create artificial solutions because there's so much administrative, institutional, corporate things that are necessary under the steeple that we just automatically, like maybe even subconsciously, reflex and say, oh, we got to create some kind of a system or program or whatever, rather than saying, wait a minute, let's emphasize our culture on this and cause our people to realize those people that are walking through the doors of our church are no different than the people that you're meeting at Kroger and City Barbecue and at the gym and whatever. They're
Yeah.
all seekers.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, it's so good. I know we're up against the clock, so I do want to hit just real quick about what balance looks like when, as
Yeah.
leaders, our goal is how do we help find this balance? How do we help strike this balance? Because when you have things functioning and operating in that place where all of these spaces are places where people are living out the mission, they're living out the value
Right.
system of the kingdom, all of that kind of stuff. Um, that's where amazing things happen. And so again, in this conversation, we're not minimizing any of these or over elevating one space or whatever. What we're saying is that when there's balance in the corporate setting, that's where ultimately you're able to set culture collectively.
Yeah.
You're able
Good.
to cast vision and direction. When you have that next group, whether it's a small group, life group name or whatever, that's really a place where you're able to build deeper, meaningful relationships. And we all know this as leaders and pastors, like it's so hard. People coming in, they've got
Yeah.
jobs and responsibilities when they come in corporate worship.
Right.
There's worship. Really, like you can have conversations with people in a Sunday service, but it's difficult and it's challenging. That life group space really creates the opportunity to really get to know people, really get connected with them. But the X group, that's the place where there's intensified
Yes.
transformation. That's where that happens, is in that space where you're able to really dig down into their own personal discipleship, address the difficult, challenging areas, be open, transparent, and walk through that. That again, as you said, that can't happen in a corporate setting typically. Now, that doesn't mean that God can't work in places and the Spirit of God goes and the Word of God moves, but many times there are questions. There are still places that people wrestle with. They hear and know the truth, but they still have places maybe that are seemingly in contradiction to the way of the kingdom. And so they need some guidance and help on how to deal with that. And then when the private missional life is imbalanced, that's where harvest is created. That's where expansion and growth into new places and new opportunities begin to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have this balance, the church becomes unified together as God's family.
Yeah.
And we become unified together in the purpose of the mission, which is the sole reason of why we're here, for us to be disciples and to make disciples.
So good. And what's funny is this is such a good and wide and broad and relevant topic. And Chris, even in this area, like for example, X groups, if we don't communicate even balance there, because X groups are for intensified transformation and intensified multiplication. So if we're not really communicating that X groups aren't just simply where you grow in God, but it's also a place where you bring new emerging disciples. In other words, your X groups aren't just a place where you get deepened and you grow and you get transformed. It's also a place where the mission happens.
Yes.
And so like, it's funny because we found, even in some ways, both of us have found in our cultures that the X groups that are having both of those pieces, if it's balanced in both of those ways,
Mm-hmm.
then X groups are healthy and striving. If the X group is focused and there's no you're not making and multiplying disciples in X groups, you're
Yeah.
just being the disciple. If there's no making and multiplying, then X groups sort of fizzle out. And over time, they just sort of, people just sort of get absorbed into the church. And so each of those spaces even has to have their own balance. So, Chris, I think the answer to complexity is not oversimplification. I think the answer is alignment. I think the answer is having a good dynamic synergy in each piece.
Yes.
At the corporate
Yes.
level, it needs the private level. At the life group level, it needs the X group level.
Yeah.
At the X group level, it needs the life group level. We had somebody recently, Chris, that had been in an X group for a few months and got into a life group. And when they got into the life group, it expanded their fellowship base. It expanded their relationships, which gave them a broadened root system
Yeah.
among the body of Christ. It
Yeah.
wasn't just this small few people that they're doing life with. And so that you've got so if you have really awesome X groups, but the X groups stay in their little, 3 or 4 or 5 people group, then you start having a bunch of stovepiped relationships and there's not a lot of interconnectivity. And so, but again, if life groups don't have X groups, the life groups become sterile and they become just individuals or church people, and they become very, inward focused. But then if X groups don't have life groups, there's not that interconnection and growing of fellowship and community.
Man, it's so true. It's so true. And the again, when those 4 spaces are in balance,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it gives space for the Spirit of God to move in different ways in each space that
Yes.
is needed, and it can move freely. And then what we know is it's intertwined or inextricably linked into us when we're spirit filled, is again the potential and responsibility for multiplication. When you start to experience this, now the church is in a place where it can multiply and not break the whole system, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard for years, like, man, if God sent us a revival like they had, in Acts chapter 2, we wouldn't be able to handle it. And so he's not going to send it to us until we get, to this place. Well, some of it was Jesus had spent 3.5 years putting these principles into them
Yeah.
so that they were able to have this balance and then work through it. As the challenges arose, we're able to work through it with the value system of the kingdom at the heart of it. So great conversation today, Ken. We had some we had some interesting comments. We got called too old today on YouTube.
It was definitely whack-a-mole day. But the cool thing about it is we're trained broadcast professionals, and rather than picking up the whack-a-mole stick, we stayed on topic and
locked in.
Yeah, we're locked and loaded because here's why. Because if it doesn't matter if the Chihuahua is running down the sidewalk and a pit bull is inside the fence, the Chihuahua can bark all at once too. The pit bull's just going to sit there and watch it bark by.
There you go. That's exactly right. But we did get some other great comments, and we apologize. We didn't maybe get to some of those today because we knew we were under a little bit of a time crunch and had a lot to get through. But we do appreciate all of the engagement today, even the
yes.
And
I've got an X group coming up. That's our time crunch today. So we're not just simply talking about it, we're doing it.
Living it out. So thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you being on. We are going to come back to you around 10 o'clock next Tuesday. Until then, go live